everybody, and welcome to Fraudible, the video podcast that brings together academics and practitioners and to discuss all things fraud. In this episode, we're going to be discussing insider fraud, and I'm absolutely honoured to be joined by academic and Dr. Rasha Kassem and practitioner Arun Chauhan. And thank you so much for joining me both. Rasha, would you mind giving us a brief introduction into you and your research?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Claire, and the pleasure is ours. I am Rasha Kassem. I'm an associate professor at Aston University, and I do extensively research fraud, all aspects of fraud, but I'm particularly passionate about insider fraud due to its impact and the scale of that particular crime. I also research fraud against individuals. There's a very, very long list of fraud against individuals and organizations, whether internal and external. I'm here to support that podcast and help raise fraud awareness.
Excellent, thank you very much, Arun.
Right, thanks, Claire, and great to be on with Rasha as well. Thanks for having me. So, I'm Arun. I'm a solicitor for my sins. I run a law firm called Tenet, and we just deal with disputes, investigations, and compliance arising out of fraud and financial crime, and advising those areas. I'm also apparently a compliance professional through the ICA, having done my postgraduate then on financial crime compliance. I sit on the board of the Fraud Advisory Panel, a charity focused obviously on trying to combat fraud and educate about fraud. So really intrigued to be here, happy to chat, really enjoy talking about the issues of insider fraud, certainly when it comes into kind of workplace culture as well. And looking forward to just getting into it.
Excellent, thank you very much. Yeah, so insider fraud, as you know, is my baby. It's my PhD topic, so I could talk about this all day. Rasha, for those listening or watching who may not have heard of insider fraud, how would you summarise it? How would you define it?
When you think about insiders, think about everyone working for the organization. That includes employees, managers, directors, and sometimes owners, if you thought about family-owned businesses. Insider fraud can be committed against the organization or for the organization. And the victims could then be the organization itself, or it can be individuals outside the organization or other businesses. And it varies. Insider fraud it encompasses a lot of crime, like, for example, financial fraud, whether this is related to manipulations in the financial records of an organization, and usually the victims would be shareholders or regulators, for example, or it could involve asset misappropriation, where someone from the organization steals assets or abuse the assets, for example. Or it can include all forms of corruption, really, from nepotism, bribery, favoritism, and conflict of interest, etc. So it is a really very common crime, and it involves a lot of other fraud crimes.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. And Arun, I guess in your space, do you find that you get a lot of insider fraud cases to work on, or is it mostly in the external fraud spaces where the legal interest is?
No, we get a fair share of insider fraud claims. But in fact, the majority I've dealt with have been in kind of mid-sized SME size operations, where you've kind of got that altruistic type of environment. Everyone's kind of almost like a family-based environment. They can be quite large companies. It's those environments where maybe people think trust as a control, and they don't realise that by putting in controls, that doesn't mean you don't trust somebody. It's that type of tension of environment. So we see a lot of those types of kind of bookkeeper, finance manager type of frauds in those types of size of organisations. Just to add to Rasha in terms of like the definition or kind of the scope of insider fraud, interestingly, we see cases which don't always lead to issues of financial loss. So we'll have breach of confidence claims, loss of key, IP, and we'll, of course, as Rasha will talk about more extensively than I can, about inflating assets and inflating the value and performance and advanced booking of income, all that kind of stuff from an accounting perspective, where you see employees trying to preserve jobs by manipulating the finances, and that's still within the facet of insider fraud. So it's a real range of stuff which we get to see.
Absolutely. And Rasha, there have been some cases in the news over the last few years about audits and accounting errors that, as Arun has said, has led to the inflation of valuation or shares and stocks and that sort of thing. Is there any insight that you can give into that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a lot to talk about in terms of financial reporting and the failure of auditors in identifying this. Just to simplify the situation, like through accounting or financial reporting, people outside the organization can see the performance of the company or the organization. And I'm saying organization here because this could happen in the public sector, private sector, or anywhere really. So, like when financial reporting fraud happens, there is deceit there. Someone outside the organization is being deceived, and that is usually the investors or perhaps the regulators. And even the customers who believed in the company and purchased its products because they know the company has good reputation, etc. So it can be a shock for everyone. Think about Tesco, for example. It's not like a recent case, but when we all heard about the horse meat scandal, which involves like a way of deceiving customers as well, food fraud, and then followed by financial fraud case where they overstated the revenues as well. I personally stopped buying anything from them because I felt like, well, this is like, a dishonest organization based on what has happened. And therefore I switched to other traders as well. From the perspective of external auditors, let's simplify what they are required to do. We don't say that external auditors are responsible for detecting fraud, but surely they have a responsibility for fraud that has been detailed in the International Standard in Auditing, referring specifically to ISA 240, if someone would like to go back and read in more detail about it. So what is it that the external auditors are required to do? They are responsible for two types of fraud, basically. Asset misappropriation, again, which involves the theft of assets and also the abuse of assets. And the second type is financial reporting fraud. The main auditor's responsibility is to ensure or to provide assurance that the financial statements are reliable, free from fraud and error, particularly what they call it material fraud and error, which confuses people. But the word materiality here refers to like the extent by which the information is going to deceive a reasonable user of the financial statement, whether this is an investor or the regulators. This is highly subjective. Still, auditors are required to do a lot in terms of fraud risk assessment, while taking into consideration the major fraud factors that you would find in the literature, including what motivates individuals to commit fraud, what are the opportunities available to commit fraud, which usually comes by weaknesses in an internal control system within the organization, the people's ability to rationalize the fraudulent behavior, and also management integrity. All these factors auditors need to take into consideration while assessing fraud risk. Then they have to respond to fraud risk. And that response will then enable auditors to take action as whether the fraud risk is high and is going to materially misstate financial statements and therefore they are going to be unreliable. Yeah. Then they are obliged to report that to a higher level of management. If they felt like a management level is also involved in the fraud case, they have to raise it to the board of directors. If they felt the board of directors is also involved in fraud, then they have to advise the organization to seek legal advice in that case. So there is a lot that auditors can do in order to contribute to fraud risk assessment and response. Within the audit team, they are also required to discuss the susceptibility of the client to fraud. So if auditors done their job properly, then you would expect them to at least forewarn the investors and the regulators that there's something wrong in the organization. Whether they are doing this or not, this is another story, and why there are issues around why external auditors are failing to do what they are supposed to do in terms of fraud risk assessment. I hope that answered your question, but if it's not, then let me know.
Absolutely. Yeah, Arun, have you got Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've got some thoughts. Well, I was writing some notes down about this, and I just wrote down about auditing culture. I was going to ask Rasha. I'm not going to be asking the questions. I'm going to ask the questions. Do. But it's that position where auditors are looking. I think that classic statement that they are watchdogs, not bloodhounds, and they're trying to look for that for any kind of information or any thread to pull that there is asset misappropriation or there is some element of reporting fraud. Now, often the whole reporting and gathering information comes down to, I suppose, how enthused and how chatty the employees can be. And sometimes that, to me, comes down to the cultural side of it. And I just wondered, from Rasha's perspective, I've seen from talks from auditors of late, they talk more about auditing culture. And I wondered what auditing culture is in the context of looking for fraud now.
Are you talking about the audit culture within audit firms or within the auditees?
No, within the auditees. So when an audit firm goes out to audit an organisation and the audit culture, are they thinking about fraud risk when they're auditing the culture of the auditees?
Yeah, definitely. This came out as a challenge in one of my recent research where I looked at why auditors fail to adequately assess fraud risk. And they talked about, for example, situations where a previous audit partner now became like the CFO or the CEO, making their life difficult, challenging them regularly, especially about accounting treatments and how things should be. That makes the auditor's job really difficult. Yeah. And in situations where, let's face it, not in the UK, not anywhere in the world, auditors are protected in a way. If they were fired, dismissed from a client's firm, then no one would basically care. There is no regulations that would then penalise the board of directors of that firm for dismissing auditors who wanted to speak up. And this is something that, I'm hoping it will be looked at in the future. So in my recent research, I found scenarios where auditors spoke about this particular challenge, them being continuously challenged by management. Audit fee is another problem as well, because they can be threatened by withholding the audit fees. And although auditors are, trying to be, watchdogs and, provide reasonable assurance and remain independent, the reality of the situation is they depend on the audit fee to survive in the market. It's a business by the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So there is that financial pressure on them, like everybody else. And again, the fact that the audit fees are paid by the auditee management is not helping the auditor independent situation. So with a culture that is not based on cooperating with the auditors and different motivations as well, especially when you talk about dishonest top management, wanting to conceal the financial reporting, perhaps obtain the bonuses, big bonuses by the end of the year, or remunerations. Perhaps they have other motives, maybe their ego, maybe, the list goes on and on. They might hide information from the auditors, for example. They might not be cooperative. They might argue with them around materiality. The audit work is based on materiality, which is subjective, as I explained earlier. So in one of the cases of my research, one of the audit managers said to me when they found a high fraud risk in one of the cases, they raised the issue to the board of directors. The audit partner discussed it with them, and there were arguments around, okay, what's the issue now? Is it the issue because the materiality is high? Just lower it down. As simple as that. Yeah. And then when the audit partner refused, the audit firm was dismissed without prior notice. Did the shareholders really care about it? Absolutely not. Do we have any regulations to protect that particular audit firm? No, that we don't. So this is another issue. If you want accountability, then we need to enable auditors to do their job properly. If they speak up and they were retaliated against, then there has to be some sort of regulations that would stop the management or directors of that firm from doing so. Some sort of penalty, whether this is financial penalty or even, prosecution or dismissal, or any strict penalty that would then encourage more auditors to speak up. I hope that answered your question. But
yeah, it did. Claire, I was thinking about Wirecard. And what happened with Wirecard and how EY, they signed off on the audit for a number of years. Yeah. But they were facing that kind of tension ultimately from the management and senior management. I know there were some strong personalities in Wirecard, but until it all kind of came crashing down and collapsed, and then KPMG came in. But those issues that Rasha was talking about, that that's one of the big challenges for insider fraud. It's not only being discovered, it's then to the outside world. When in your research, Claire, how hard is it for the outside world to learn about these events if management suppress it as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And this brings us on and to the culture side of things. So my my research shows that actually people just don't want to admit that insider fraud is a risk. It's not a thing because all of our colleagues are absolutely lovely people. They're my friends. We go to the pub. We have a great time. We have a WhatsApp group, and they're great people. They would never commit fraud. And you think, yeah, all right, sure. And I think that there's sort of a more personal feel to it because you've hired these people. You work with them for 8 hours a day every day. And I think it has the potential to hurt more because the fraudster. It isn't as if you're sort of being defrauded out of £100 online.
Proximity is a thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that it's the fact that you're with these people and you're all working towards under the common goal of making your business a success, and then to find that someone's actually sabotaging that for their own gain. I think that's part of the reason why boards and senior management just feel that they don't want to accept that it is a huge risk, and especially since COVID and the cost of living crisis. Obviously, people work from home now or in a hybrid model most of the time, and you can never guarantee that the measures that you used to have in the office, such as you could go into a private room and to make a call, or you lock your screen every time you leave your desk. I can't guarantee, and I don't think anyone can really guarantee that they're doing those same things at home. So actually, it doesn't have to be just the individual themselves. It could be the risk that anyone that they live with could have access to all this information as well.
Yeah, that's completely it. And it comes back to those kind of balancing those controls and how you get your best out of your people by giving controls that work for them. I remember I went to a talk on trust, and it was about why the latest or the very younger generations want to operate in a certain way. And I think this professor somewhere in Oxford had talked about their son was playing Roblox or Minecraft or something like that. And they were saying to their son, why do you like this game so much? And they said, because I can build my world with my rules. And it was representative of what the workforce is going to be like coming through. If you give them their world and to work in their rules, they may want to work 3 hours in the middle hours of the night and 6 hours in the morning and nothing in the day, but they'll get their job done really well. You build controls around them being able to do that, you'll get the most out of your employees. You'll have a really good environment, and that comes back to the culture point. But that also means thinking about the controls, like you say. If they're in a flat share and they're all, they're working around the coffee table and everyone's making a phone call and talking about something which could be at risk of insider trading, so on. I just don't think we need to be shoehorning our employees into the way we think they need to work. I do say, how do your employees want to work? And let's build controls around them, and you're going to have better, effective controls because more people are bought in. Yeah,
absolutely makes sense. Yeah, I think it also comes down to the whistleblowing side of things. There are a lot of people I interviewed for my research who said that whilst the organisation has the whistleblowing policy, no one's read it, no one knows where it's saved, people haven't been trained on it, and the people who are identified within the organisation as the people to whom the wrongdoing is reported, and they've never been trained on how to receive that information and then what to do afterwards. And actually, in most cases, they don't even know that they're the person who's been signposted and to be the go-to individual. So I think there's a wider collaboration between the culture and the whistleblowing side of things, because obviously trust is brilliant, but as you said earlier, it's not a control, because trust can be broken like that. And I think that it also comes down to the whistleblowing side of things, because is it there purely so that they can tick a box and that they say that we have a policy, but actually if no one knows how to use it, then there's no point in having one, almost.
Yeah.
First. Otherwise, I'll take half an hour. You go first.
Yeah, I think the problem is organizations design control without a proper understanding of how fraud works. Fraud is committed by human beings. And if you looked at why they commit fraud in the first place, you'll find, the motivation side is actually a key antecedent of fraud. They can't commit fraud not necessarily just because of the financial aspects of it, which is a motive in itself, but it can also be committed as a result of non-financial aspects, like taking revenge, for example, feeling that they have been mistreated in the organization or mistrusted. So I would argue back that, trust plays a very important role in encouraging staff to refrain from committing fraud. Is it enough? Absolutely not, like you said, Claire. But it can be a control to be used. Making people feel that they are trusted and valued and appreciated in the organization is very important, but it's not enough on its own. So thinking about the fraud factors, when an organization tries to design controls, they have to design controls that addresses every single control for fraud factor that we talked about, like the motivation side of things. Let's talk about financial motives. So organizations have to design, for example, fair pay. They have to have like an open door policy, other benefits in order to encourage the employees to refrain from committing fraud. Yeah. How can you overcome greed? You can overcome greed by maybe regular assessments, by again, doing proper vetting, by rotating people around so that no one has absolute power. And then if you talked about non-financial factors like revenge, etc., treating employees fairly and with respect and enhancing their integrity level through the training is something very important as well. Making them feel that they are trusted human beings and valued in the organization is one thing. Not having monitoring, assuming that there will be full trust, is another. But we can't build the entire control procedures over monitoring, because it can be offensive. And some managers can use micromanagement techniques which can actually have negative impact. I remember I came across a case during the pandemic where one of the employees was just committed fraud just to make a point about this. Her manager was micromanaging her. He was asking her to take photos of her screen, and she was an honest employee. She would have never committed fraud, whether she worked at home or in the office. But his way of treating her made her feel like, I'm going to commit fraud just to prove the point that regardless of how much you micromanaged me and mistreated me and misjudged me, I could have committed fraud if I wanted anyway, but I did not want to. So again, there is that balance between thinking of monitoring and controls that can be offensive versus controls that can be protective and really have a good impact. So back again to Arun's point and yours, Claire, I mean, trust is very important, but it's about how can we use trust in an effective way in an organization, making people feel trusted and valued and appreciated in the organization. Would that work? Absolutely, because again, it takes away the motivation side of things, the non-financial side where employees feel valued and part of the organization. It's like having a family almost, and when you love your family, you're not going to harm them. It's that thing, it's very important to appreciate human nature and understand it and also treat people fairly and with respect. The other side of the equation is if you thought about opportunities weaknesses like lack of monitoring, lack of independent checks on performance, appointing unqualified people, lack of job rotations, and the list goes on and on. Surely this will reduce the opportunity side if it is done properly. The rationalization side can come due to lack of knowledge as well. People might not even know or realize that they are committing fraud, and there are lots of cases where people are committing fraud, not realizing it is something wrong. We live in a global world, and what is right from your perspective might not be right from another person's perspective. Similarly, what is wrong might not be wrong from someone else's perspective. So organizations need to bring together all employees, train them on the values, what is acceptable behavior, what's unacceptable behavior, because then you're reducing the rationalization of an individual saying, well, I didn't know that this is wrong. I didn't know that this is unacceptable, for example. Having said that, rationalization is tricky because you will always get individuals who don't care about rationalization. They have pathological desire to defraud, and they are dishonest by nature. So they can commit fraud knowing that what they're doing is wrong and they don't care about it. And these individuals need to be really identified at the vetting stage. We need to maybe think about interviewing people in a different way, instead of asking about why did you join this company, or how many years of experience do you have. Perhaps we need to change the interview process, give them ethical scenarios, perhaps maybe see how they would react in a certain situation. Focus more on ethics and integrity, get the message out there that if you are dishonest, you're not going to stay in. Even if the vetting process allowed you in at the start, we are going to be watching you, and those dishonest individuals don't belong in the organization. This is an ongoing process that should not really end at the interview stage. Usually organizations go for vetting as well for new recruits, but not for existing employees. It has to be done carefully in order not to offend them. But there has to be that understanding that people's circumstances change over time. So the fact that someone ticked the box, the vetting process at the start, does not mean that they will continue to be honest throughout their employment. So there has to be checks and balances throughout. Integrity is a very important factor as well in committing fraud. So it's very important to regularly educate individuals and, telling them about the impact of fraud and the consequences of fraud. So the training should not be just tailored around fear, but it should also be educational in a way and constructive. The message should be, we are in that together. Think about if fraud got the company, you're not going to have a job. We have examples where, think about patisserie Valerie and Wirecard, the fact that an employee is working for a company, you receive a phone call or you hear in the news that your company does not exist anymore. This is like hard hitting as well. You might not be part of the fraud at all, but you lost your job, and this has a psychological impact. You might wonder, what did I do wrong to lose my job just like that? So again, the consequences of fraud need to be explained better, and the message should always be like, we are in it together. We have to fight fraud together. Making employees feel that they are part of countering fraud is very important. And instead of saying, I am watching you, you're going to be a fraudster, and I'm going to stop you, sort of.
I think I'll come back onto whistleblowing in a moment, just picking up some of the points from Rasha said there, because it's really important. As though, as we said, trust isn't the control, but I do think that whole educating employee to understand that controls are there to help protect them and to protect the organisation is important. So, by having controls, as I said, doesn't mean you don't trust people. But to kind of get that position where everyone in your organisation kind of understands what the moral code of conduct is for the organisation, and they have a culture where they do the right thing rather than the right thing for them, it takes time and it takes consistency. So, for me, that means, sometimes I think insider fraud or whistleblowing falls down is because people don't quite even know what fraud means in the context of in their world, their job, their employment. I don't think fraud is relatable to a lot of employees. So one of the things I was at an interview for a tender a few days ago, and they said, well, how do we keep fraud relatable to our employees? And we talked about whistleblowing in this interview as well. And I said, well, just something really simple, like every month the employer tells all the employees in an email, whatever it is, these are all the consumer frauds going on. Keep yourself safe at home. Make it relatable at home, that they think about fraud and talk about fraud with their kids, their parents. They'll think about fraud as a concept in the workplace, and then it starts to become relatable. So then when you move to whistleblowing, I think the big fall down we have in this country about whistleblowing, there's lots of big fall downs about whistleblowing in this country, but one of the major things is, two major things is, you touched on process, Claire, and I'll deal with that second, but the first one is what we use whistleblowing for. We use whistleblowing when we detect a problem or we see a concern. We don't use whistleblowing when we see a trip hazard. We don't encourage employees to use the whistleblowing program to say, I've seen a gap in a control there. Nothing's happened, but actually, you know what? That's a trip hazard. Someone's going to fall over that, or, more sinister in fraud. And if we could just widen the scope of whistleblowing so that the policy, when it's on a website, it's not just for internal people, it's for external, your counterparties out there who can report fraud. How often does another supplier basically grass on another supplier? There's more opportunities there. And I think the other reason whistleblowing falls down is process. People don't understand the process, and one of the biggest things I've heard back and feedback is, I did report something to our whistleblowing line, and I never heard anything afterwards, so they just brushed it under the carpet. I was like, well, no. What happens is, when you report it, you may never hear anything after that. Yeah. It doesn't mean anything's happened. That's protecting the process. But the individual employees didn't understand the process. You've got to explain the process, not just the anonymity side, but the process and why you might not hear it. It doesn't mean we're not looking at it. It's just trying to weave all that together, isn't it? From a HR perspective, right through to reporting. And I think it's as Rasha said, if the employees know they're not being looked at for committing fraud, but they're being looked at to say, look, you're our eyes and ears. You're our folks on the ground. We're in this together, kind of almost like a tribal mentality. You're going to get more reporting, or you're going to get more fraud stopped because their spidey senses are up.
Yeah.
Can I just add something as well to what Arun said about whistleblowing? The issue goes beyond that. The fact that an organization has a whistleblowing mechanism and they say that it's anonymous is one thing. The fact that employees trust it is actually anonymous is another. And this is something that organizations usually overlook. Like in one of my recent research where I explored fraud risk within policing, and some of the police officers said to me, we do have whistleblowing and they say it's anonymous, but is it really? They worry, they have no faith that even if it says on paper that it's anonymous, that it's not anonymous, and also the ease of the process is another. So it's not just about explaining the process, but in one of the cases I came across, like whistleblowers were saying that they have to go through a long process where they have to report fraud to various individuals, for example. First, it's not anonymous. Second, it's like a long-winded process, and people have other things to do. Why would they bother? They feel like they have to. It's more. It feels more like a penalty rather than an encouraging way of like reporting it. Why would you waste your time that much instead of having a simplified process, just one step to report it? Yeah. So ensuring the anonymity and also telling people how it is anonymous is something important, because it's not enough to say, oh, it's anonymous, by the way. Back to the issue of trust, how employees can trust that whistleblowing mechanisms within an organization is actually anonymous is very important, because without this trust, people are not going to report it. I think the other issue is like the simplicity of the process would play like an important role in that. The culture within the organization, because in some places, take the police as example, if you reported one of your colleagues, even if they are dishonest and you disagree with what they are doing, they have the silent code, and you would be called a snitch if you actually reported anything that is happening. Is this happening in other organizations? I'm telling you, absolutely, yeah. People would normally victimize an individual who reported their colleagues. Even if you're unhappy with someone and you reported it, you notice the reaction of your manager would be like, oh, you're not happy with how people are dealing. And there's no sympathy with what happened to you. So automatically, surely you can't get along with people because you're complaining. Why you're complaining? So we need to encourage people to complain about things that they believe is unethical or is wrong. And I'm not just talking about fraud, but it's like there is a long list of unethical behavior, bullying, etc. And a lot of research as well finding relationship between individuals who use intimidation and bullying and that engage in unethical behavior and the probability of them engaging in fraud as well. think about the Wirecard case and the fact that when it came to light by the investigative journalism, the top management immediately intimidated the journalists instead of like admitting what has happened and trying to look into it. So that's it. This is what I wanted to highlight.
Just want to clarify, we did all, in terms of like great research in terms of, I know you look at fintechs as well and the insider world. I do think though with whistleblowing, there's kind of like this tension and contradiction that if people need to use whistleblowing to report wrongdoing, or it doesn't need to be fraud, it could be discrimination. Right? Does that demonstrate there's a lack of confidence in management or line management to be able to go to your line manager and say, I've seen an issue? Why can't you talk about it openly to someone who's your line manager, and you have to go the whistleblowing route? And I've seen some organisations are trying to collate how often they get whistleblowing reports, because if they get quite a lot, it means there's lack of confidence in the line management. And I just wondered if that's something you've heard about or touched upon in research.
Yeah, it's definitely sort of comes back, as does everything, I think, to the whole trust and confidence side of things. And I think that it's also part of the idea that they don't understand the process, because, as you said, I think that people think if they don't hear back, then nothing's been done. And if nothing's been done, then I've not been taken seriously. And if I've not been taken seriously, then I'm not going to bother again. So I think it's also a lack of trust in the process as well as the people. I think they're two different entities, even though the people write the processes. But I think it does absolutely demonstrate that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but also I want to say back to the point of communication. I wonder, why can't they communicate the results of the whistleblowing? They don't have to break anonymity, but surely, if you put some effort in reporting something, you would like to know if they have followed up or if they have ignored you, even if it's just a comment about something has been reported and we are investigating it and taking it serious, unethical behavior is unacceptable in the organization. It makes people say, they are doing something about it. Even if it did not result in anything, they would at least know that they have investigated and are doing something about it.
Absolutely, yeah. We are running out of time slightly, so let me end with some fun legislation. So, the Economic Crime and Corporate and Transparency Act, and the failure to prevent. I think that on LinkedIn, I saw loads of people getting very excited about this when it was in the bill stage. People were super keen, and they thought, this is brilliant. It's going to get companies to sit up and to take action, and that they're going to take fraud and insider fraud more seriously. And then we read it, and then I think people went, "Oh, is that it?" So what are your thoughts on that, Arun?
Yeah, is that it? Any step in the direction of putting fraud on a wider corporate agenda is a good step. There is a tension about putting too much. I think there's a political tension about putting the onus on businesses to do a lot of work in an economy which is broadly teetered around a recession for a while. And I'm trying to choose my words carefully without basically inciting a riot. It doesn't go far enough. It should have applied to smaller companies. Obviously not micro entities and very small outside of the SME market, but it's only capturing a very small window. And also for the fraud to only be about the own benefit of the company also limits the type of areas of prosecution which would be permissible. It's a start. It's the best way I can put it. The Bribery Act was a start as well. And what we realised with the Bribery Act, there are two sides to the coin. There's the piece of legislation, which did prompt a hell of a lot of activity when that came around. Lawyers, all professional service providers had a field day. I was in that part of it as well. It was great fun. But the other side is, are we going to see the prosecutions? We haven't seen any prosecutions out of the Criminal Finances Act. So I think by being narrow and a little step means we're not going to see much in the way of prosecution. And I think it's going to drift into quiet kind of territory in a year or two, and we won't hear much about it, sadly. I hope I'm wrong. And I hope it's extended in terms of scope. But my feelings are a bit of a damp squib.
Rasha, any thoughts on that?
Don't get me started. There's a lot of issues there in the legislations. Starting with the Fraud Act that is only focusing on fraud against individuals, really, not including fraud against organizations when you think about how insiders can abuse the assets within the organization or perhaps manipulate records for their own benefit, not necessarily for the organization benefit. The organization becomes a victim, and there is a lot of care about organizations which would have massive economic impact. It will impact our society. And it will weaken the country in a way. So this is something that needs a lot of attention from the regulators. Looking at the failure to prevent, I was really disappointed to see the limitations in that particular offence, because it is only limited to organizations with certain size and certain profitability, and that would be a motive in itself for organizations to manipulate the profitability, just not to tick the box or to be inside that category of firms to be looked at. So again, I wonder why they didn't say everybody has to put some procedures to prevent fraud. Why would that be a problem? Why would have this been a problem? It makes you immediately think that perhaps the regulators are thinking more of financial penalties, again, the same way as the Financial Reporting Council operates at the moment. Auditors are not doing their job and they're being penalized. The fines go back to Treasury, and it goes on and it doesn't stop. So again, the regulators need to really rethink and reconsider those acts. If they would like to see an actual impact, an actual change in the world of fraud. Another thing that concerns me is even with the economic crime and transparency bill, there was talks about international collaboration and assurances that the fraudsters are going to be caught even if they are outside the borders, and it makes you wonder what sort of agreements they put in place before getting out the act. How much can we trust this? How much can, for example, fraudsters believe that this is a serious thing? Accountability, when it's weak, it doesn't have any impact at all. It's not enough that you say you're going to do something without actually having a plan or actions to implement it. We heard recently about the Fraud Summit and the fact that we're collaborating with the US, but there is no transparency whatsoever about what has been agreed on. How can they, for example, ensure that fraudsters are caught wherever they are? What sort of agreements are in place? How about the other countries? Because it's not only limited to the US and UK. How about the world? Why can't we do a global summit, for example, to ensure international collaboration and procedures and mechanisms that all other countries agree to, instead of assuming they are happy to collaborate without proper plan?
Can I just add one thing about, kind of conscious of time, but by bringing it onto the agenda of companies to think about fraud, and even those companies that are suddenly finding they're not caught by this because they're not in scope on size or assets or employee numbers, etc. What's important is companies are thinking about fraud and actually wanting to prevent it. And one of so a lot of the work we do is the litigation side. So what I see where it all falls down on insider fraud is actually the litigation against the employees sometimes falls down because gross misconduct isn't defined in a contract, it's defined in a disciplinary procedure. Employees, you can't actually demonstrate an employee knew what was expected of them in terms of moral actions, ethics, probity, because it's not in the contracts. Same with suppliers, they don't know what they're meant to be not doing. So I think if organisations, anyone who's hearing this and they're not in scope, you can still up your fraud game, but just look at your contracts, arrangements, your code of conduct, your supplier contracts and so on. Put the right clauses in. Gives you lower hanging fruit claims. A lot easier to recover your losses with lower hanging contractual fruit claims than trying to be Magnum PI and prove fraud in a civil court, because I know that gets quite complex. So it can be a spark for other organisations if the counter-fraud community keep talking about it as well.
Okay.
That's a very interesting point. Just one final point I would like to add about the Failure to Prevent Act. it kind of mentions that if fraud is committed to benefit the organization, and this one made me really angry because yes, insider fraud can be committed for the organization or against organization, but hey, how can you say that fraud actually benefited the organization? Any half clever solicitor can get the corporation out of this by demonstrating reputational damage and waste of time and waste of money and lack of knowledge of top management. So I'm not sure who drafts these acts, but I really hope the regulators would consult fraud experts before they produce any further acts in the future, because we need a lot of brainstorming before getting something like this out there, because producing the act and then refining it and getting it just takes a lot of time, and people lose faith in how much they understand about fraud and its nature, and how strong or robust the procedures are.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, as much as I could talk about this all day, you guys have meetings to go to, which is very, very selfish. That is all we have time for. I'd like to thank Arun and Rasha for joining me today to talk about insider fraud, and thank you both. My name's Claire Maillet, and this is Fraudible.